It's week 4 of the NFL season, and here are my predictions for this week. But first, how did I do in week 3? In week 3, I was 9-7 in my predictions. Kicking off the week on Thursday Night Football is the 2-1 Lions versus the 2-1 Green Bay Packers. The Lions are currently favored by 1.5 points. In week 3 for the Lions, Jahmyr Gibbs had 17 carries for 80 yards, and Amon-Ra St. Brown had 9 receptions for 102 yards. And their defense was amazing with 7 sacks, which Aiden Hutchinson had 2 of them. And for the Packers, they were down 17-0 entering the fourth quarter, and they scored 18 unanswered points all in the fourth quarter to come back and beat the New Orleans Saints 18-17. C.J. Gardner-Johnson was just placed on IR for the Lions, and Aaron Jones is still questionable for this game. And I have the Lions winning this week. Now moving into Sunday, we have the 2-1 Atlanta Falcons versus the 1-2 Jacksonville Jaguars. And this game is going to be played in London. This Falcons team did not play good last week. They only had 183 yards and averaged only 2.8 yards per play, and they allowed 7 sacks. And the Jaguars lost 37-17 to the Houston Texans. But their offense was still very good, having 404 total yards. But they did have 2 turnovers. And the Jaguars will win. The 2-1 Baltimore Ravens are going into Cleveland to face the 2-1 Browns. Last week, the Browns' defense was dominant versus the Titans by allowing only 3 points and holding the Titans to 94 yards the entire game. And Derrick Henry never was able to get going during this game. He only had 11 carries for 20 yards. And Deshaun Watson was great for the Browns. He was 27 of 33 passing and had 289 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Amari Cooper also had a great game with 7 receptions for 116 yards and a touchdown. And on defense, Myles Garrett had a great game with 3.5 sacks and 5 QB hits. And the Ravens lost 22-19 in overtime to the Colts because Justin Tucker missed a 61-yard field goal at the end of the fourth quarter. But in this game, Lamar Jackson had 202 yards passing and 101 yards rushing with 2 rushing touchdowns. And Kyle Hamilton had 3 sacks. But with how good the Browns' defense has looked so far and the way their offense played last week, I think the Browns will win this game. The 3-0 Miami Dolphins are facing the 2-1 Buffalo Bills. The Bills are currently 2.5-point favorites in this game. This game should be very fun and might be the best game of the week. Last week, the Miami Dolphins beat the Broncos 70-20, which is the most points in a game since 1966, and almost set the record for most points in a single game, which is currently 72. In this game, Tua was 23 of 26 with 309 yards and 4 touchdowns, and Devon Achane had 18 carries for 203 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns, and had 4 receptions for 30 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Raheem Mostert had 13 carries for 82 yards and 3 touchdowns, and had 7 receptions for 60 yards and a touchdown. And also Tyreek Hill had 9 receptions for 157 yards and a touchdown. The Bills also had a great game last week, beating the Commanders 37-3, where James Cook had 15 carries for 98 yards, and Stephon Diggs had 8 receptions for 111 yards. This game is very hard to pick, but Miami has just been so dominant through the first 3 weeks, I think they will win. Next, the 0-3 Broncos versus the 0-3 Bears. Both of these teams have been so bad this season, but one of them has to win this week, unless there is a tie. But right now, I think the Broncos are the better team and they will win. Next, the 2-1 Steelers versus the 1-2 Texans. The Steelers are 3-point favorites going into this game. The Steelers this season have had a very good defense, and last week they had 4 sacks and 3 interceptions versus the Raiders. And the Texans are coming off a huge win versus the Jaguars, and CJ Stroud has been very good to start off his NFL career. Last week, Stroud had 280 yards passing and 2 touchdowns. And Tank Dell had 5 receptions for 145 yards and a touchdown. And I have the Texans winning this week. Next, the 0-3 Vikings are facing the 0-3 Panthers. Minnesota is 3.5-point favorites going into this game. Kirk Cousins is having a great start to his season, and last week he had 367 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. And Justin Jefferson continues to have a crazy start to the season and had 7 receptions for 149 yards and a touchdown. And for the Panthers, Andy Dalton got the start last week and had a great game with 361 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Adam Thielen had 11 receptions for 145 yards and a touchdown. And the Vikings will win this week. Next is the 1-2 Rams versus the 2-1 Colts. The Colts had a surprising victory over the Ravens last week and have looked pretty good to start the season. And the Rams lost a close game to the Bengals, 19-16. And Puka Nacua for the Rams and last week had 5 receptions for 72 yards. And last week for the Colts, Zach Moss had 30 carries for 122 yards. But for this week, Anthony Richardson is still questionable due to a concussion. But Gardner Minshew has been pretty good so far this season, and I still have the Colts winning this week. Next is the 2-1 Buccaneers versus the 2-1 Saints. And the Saints are 3-point favorites in this game. And Derek Carr is questionable for this week's game due to an AC joint sprain in his shoulder and is considered week to week. The Buccaneers did struggle versus the Eagles last week on Monday Night Football, but if Derek Carr doesn't play this week, I think the Buccaneers will win. The 2-1 Commanders are facing the 3-0 Eagles. Last week, Sam Howell threw 4 interceptions, and the Eagles have been just so good this season, and they will win this game. The 1-2 Bengals are going against the 1-2 Titans this week. The Bengals are 2-point favorites. Last week, the Bengals got their first win of the season versus the Rams. In that game, Jamar Chase had 12 receptions for 141 yards, and Joe Mixon had 19 carries for 65 yards and a touchdown. The Bengals' defense was also very good, and they had 6 sacks and 2 interceptions. And the Titans last week were very disappointing. Derrick Henry only had 20 yards rushing, and Ryan Tannehill only had 104 yards passing. And the Bengals are going to win. Next, the 1-2 Raiders are facing the 1-2 Chargers. The Chargers are 5.5-point favorites entering this game. Last week, Justin Herbert had a great game, passing 40 of 47 with 405 yards. And 3 touchdowns. And Keenan Allen had 18 receptions for 215 yards. And for the Raiders, Jimmy Garoppolo had 324 yards passing with 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. And already has 6 interceptions on the season. And Devontae Adams had a great game with 13 receptions for 172 yards and 2 touchdowns. And the Chargers will win this game. The 1-2 Patriots are going against the 2-1 Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys lost last week to the Cardinals, 28-16. Tony Pollard had 22 carries for 122 yards, and Michael Gallup had 6 receptions for 92 yards. And the Patriots got their first win of the season against the Jets, 15-10. Ezekiel Elliott had 16 carries for 80 yards, and Pharaoh Brown had 2 receptions for 71 yards and a touchdown. And the Patriots will win. Next, the 1-2 Cardinals versus the 3-0 49ers. Last week for the 49ers, Christian McCaffrey had 18 carries for 85 yards and a touchdown, and is his 13th consecutive game with a touchdown. And Deebo Samuel had 6 receptions for 129 yards and a touchdown. And the Cardinals are coming off a huge win over the Cowboys. In that game, James Conner had 14 carries for 98 yards and a touchdown. But the 49ers will win. On Sunday Night Football is the 2-1 Chiefs versus the 1-2 Jets. The Chiefs are 9.5-point favorites entering this game. And last week the Chiefs had a blowout win versus the Bears, 41-10. And the Jets have really struggled without Aaron Rodgers. And I have the Chiefs winning. And on Monday Night Football, we have the 2-1 Seahawks versus the 1-2 Giants. In week 3 for the Seahawks, Kenneth Walker had 18 carries for 97 yards and 2 touchdowns, and DK Metcalf had 6 receptions for 112 yards. And the Giants have really struggled this season, and I have the Seahawks winning. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Goodbye.